Slaanesh, also known as the Dark Prince, the Prince of Pleasure, the Lord of Excess, the Perfect Prince, and Prince of Chaos in the Imperium of Man and she who thirsts among the Aeldari, is the Chaos God of pleasure, pain, hedonism, excess, perfection and decadence. Lust, pride and self-indulgence are the hallmarks of all who follow it. Slaanesh is the youngest of the four major Chaos gods, having come to full sentience within the Immaterium only during the 30th millennium. Slaanesh is the Prince of Pleasure, the dark god dedicated to the pursuit of earthly gratification and the overthrow of all decent behavior, as well as hedonism and pleasure for its own sake. It is the god of obsession, the master of excess in all things, from gluttony to lust to megalomania. Its sacred number is 6 and the colors associated with Slaanesh are riotous purples, pinks and black. The demonic armies of Slaanesh are known as the Legions of Excess. Wherever mortals are ruled by their own unquenchable desires, the Dark Prince of Chaos is there in the shadows, whispering, tempting, and feasting on a banquet of souls. But this is true in all things, not just carnal pleasures. Those who desire to indulge in the finest culinary delights, the most beautiful artworks, even the most sensual clothing, could all be amongst Slaanesh's disciples. Just as importantly, Slaanesh is also the god of perfection. The singer striving for the most beautiful song or the warrior who seeks the perfect fighting techniques, both could be devotees of Slaanesh. Slaanesh was given life by the immorality and hubris of the ancient Aeldari Empire. As their empire reached its zenith, the Aeldari became lost in their own decadence, for they experienced sensation and emotion to a far greater degree than any other intelligent species of the galaxy. The capabilities of their highly advanced technology meant that the Aeldari did not need to labor or wage war. Instead, they were able to dedicate their lives to whatever idle pursuits took their fancy. Over several generations, this indolence and hedonism came to rule and pervert their souls. In the Immaterium, the collective psychic reflections of their indolence and amoral hedonism caused a new major chaos power to stir, beginning in the 25th millennium of the Terran calendar. Created by one species' pure dedication to indulgence and excess, the first psychic motes of what would become Slaanesh began to coalesce. The dormant Slaanesh fed upon the unchecked collective psyche of the Aeldari, drawing on their lusts and ambitions, their artistry and pursuit of excellence in all things. In turn, as Slaanesh grew, its nascent dreams trickled into the minds of the Aeldari and fueled their desires, pushing them ever onwards towards their eventual doom. Eventually, the Aeldari civilization devolved into little more than pleasure cults dedicated to every act of physical, mental and spiritual fulfillment. Blood stained the statuary of their plazas as crowds of drug-addled maniacs sated their violent desires in the streets of the Aeldari homeworlds. On one particularly depraved night, the debauchery reached a terrible crescendo that tore out the heart of the Aeldari Empire and left it ravaged beyond recovery. The fall of the Aeldari in the early 30th millennium was signaled by the birth scream of Slaanesh, a tsunami of emotion and psychic power that heralded the Prince of Pleasure's arrival in the realm of chaos even as it shaped a new dominion within that dimension to serve as its home, the Dark Prince's realm. The psychic implosion caused by Slaanesh's birth swallowed hundreds of worlds at the heart of the Aeldari Empire in what is now the Imperium of Man's Segmentum Obscurus. The blast killed billions of Aeldari in a single instant and devoured a great section of the galaxy in the process. Such was its ferocity that it overwhelmed the barrier between the material and the immaterial, forming the massive, permanent warp rift later named by humanity as the Eye of Terror. Rampant and hungry, Slaanesh devoured the minds and souls of the Aeldari, absorbing them into its essence. Across the galaxy, that ancient species was almost wiped out. After its birth, Slaanesh slew most of the Aeldari and their gods in the Immaterium, except for the Aeldari god of war Kala Mensha Khan. Kain's psychic energy was instead dispersed into many separate pieces scattered across the various infinity circuits of the Aeldari craft worlds. The laughing god Sigorak also survived Slaanesh's birth by fleeing into the labyrinth dimension of the webway. While Aisha, the goddess of fertility and the harvest, was defeated alongside her divine brethren, she was not destroyed outright and absorbed by Slaanesh like the rest of the Aeldari pantheon. Slaanesh vanquished her as it had all of the other Aeldari gods within the warp, but only took her prisoner rather than absorbing her energies outright. What fell purpose Slaanesh had in keeping Aisha alive, none amongst the Aeldari now know, but the Prince of Pleasure was ultimately denied its spoils. For some reason Nurgle, the Plague Lord, waged war against Slaanesh to rescue the Aeldari goddess. Why Grandfather Nurgle intervened is unclear. although some Aeldari savants believe that one of the older major chaos gods wanted to give the youngest amongst them a good lesson about its proper place in the order of things. What is known is that Nurgle's demonic legions proved victorious and the plague god took the Aeldari goddess back to its domain in the realm of chaos. Only a relative few Aeldari survived Slaanesh's birth feast. Other Aeldari survivors included the Harlequin, and those Craftworld Aeldari or Asuryani, who were very far away from the Aeldari home worlds when the warp rift formed. Most of the survivors that remain have become sworn enemies of the Dark Prince, and yet a few of them, the Druhari, have formed isolated cabals that still behave as their ancestors did, perversely following the downward spiral of excess and hedonism. That is how events are viewed from the chronology of the material universe. In the warp, however, things are different, for the immaterium is not bound by linear four-dimensional time, and events do not occur in a strict sequence of cause and effect. As its rival gods reckon it, Slaanesh has always existed in the warp, and yet has never existed at all. Some say that it is impossible for mortals to look upon the divine face of Slaanesh without losing their soul to it, for all who see its face become willing slaves to the whims of the Dark Prince, embracing its ways with wild abandon. The mere knowledge of Slaanesh's existence can cause a world to topple into corruption and hidden depravity. Not even the agents of the Inquisition know for sure how far Slaanesh's influence spreads, for wherever the lust for the pleasures of power and temporal gain exists, the talons of Slaanesh dig deep. Despite their best efforts, it is almost certain that the Imperium is rotten to the core, just as the Aeldari Empire was before it. How long before it succumbs to a similar fate? If the legends are to be believed, there was one being born into the warp from the depravity and corruption of an entire species. Over thousands and thousands of Terran years, the ancient Aeldari, a race with souls of limitless passion and nearly limitless psychic capabilities, allowed themselves to be consumed with decadence. Because of their powers, passions, and unique connections to the immaterium, the disturbances their depravity touched off were singularly dangerous. Even just this vague bit of knowledge is little more than rumor to most inhabitants of the galaxy. Still fewer are privy to the secrets that lie within the shrouded and nearly inaccessible vaults of the Black Library, the hidden craftworld that is the ancient repository of Aeldari knowledge located deep within the webway. Within these somber chambers, ancient manuscripts point to an unspeakable event that changed the galaxy forever. From the perverse thoughts, actions, and deeds of the Aeldari a new god was born, a very real god that was indeed a reflection of the species that unwittingly gave it life. Its violent birth signaled the eventual death of the species that gestated it. The tomes of the Black Library say that Slaanesh was born from the uncontrolled and excessive need for sensation that had come to preoccupy every moment of every day for nearly every Aeldari. Through the incredibly advanced technology and psychic mastery that the species had developed over the Terran millennia, they passed the days living in unimaginable luxury. They had no need to concern themselves with matters such as daily survival, manual labor, or warding off external threats. Nor did they feel bound by social constraints. They had no need to think of how their actions would affect others, not even within their own families, since there would never be a time when they needed anything from them. Everything was at all times theirs. Even death had no real meaning, for in that long ago time before Slaanesh's birth, the souls of the Aeldari possessed the ability to reincarnate from the immaterium into newborn members of their species soon after death. There was as yet nothing within the Empyrean to hunger after those souls. The passions that burned deeply within the Aeldari's souls were unbound and freely explored to depths that other intelligent species could not fathom. A mind freed from all concerns of reciprocation, fear of reprisal, or death is able to turn fully inward and wander into unknown places, seeking previously unconsidered diversions and sensations. When an entire race unshackled its minds in this way, unusually powerful psychic energy was cast into the warp, and the unnatural essences that reside in the warp responded. The darkest moment of Aeldari history, the Fall, is chronicled as a cautionary tale, one that the keepers of the Black Library, known as the Black Council, study continually. Their hope is that some path toward a return to ascendance, or at least a way to avoid their species' ever-looming doom, can be found. The tale says that the vast majority of the members of the ancient Aeldari species, unprepared as they were for the god their unbridled passion and perversion had birthed, were consumed in an instant. Their minds, and worse their souls, were connected to chaos in a way they could not have foreseen. They had become slaves to darkness, and when the newborn master hungered, the souls of the Aeldari were forfeit as its sustenance. For most of the remaining Aeldari, the birth of Slaanesh and the fall of their civilization marked a profound change in the course they would take, not only through history, but also as a people. Retreating to their craft worlds, they forged a new way of life, defined by discipline and a determination to fight back against their doom and survive. This resolve was bolstered by fear, which brought the overwhelming majority of those who resisted any change ultimately in line with the new way, that of the Asuryani path. Slaanesh was not content with the souls it had harvested in the moment of its birth. It continued to seek out the remaining Aeldari, savoring the succulent taste of each soul it claimed. For a member of a race once so proud and seemingly eternal, the thought of being snuffed out forever to nourish a twisted god was terrifying. That it was a deity of their own creation only served to magnify the horror. Yet some refused to change. Whether from pride, a sense of defiance, or the simple inability to change, some Aeldari, the kindred known as the Druhari, continued down a path of excess and sensual indulgence and do so to this day. They live each moment knowing it could be their last, not only in mortal life, but in eternal existence. This heightened feeling of risk, of spending each moment on the edge of a knife, fuels them to indulge in even greater acts of depravity and to push the limits of sensation. They are not, however, the only ones who damn themselves this way. The powers of chaos hold sway over so many mortals not because they represent some esoteric concept with rare appeal, no, they are so insidious because they are precisely the opposite. With khorne, it is the inherent nature of conflict and the struggle for survival. For Nurgle, it is the inevitability of death and decay and the fear and despair this engenders. For Tzeentch, it is the ever-changing nature of the universe and the need to feel some measure of control through the pursuit of knowledge and worldly power. These are all base instincts of every mortal mind, primal parts of the lives of every intelligent living thing in the galaxy. Slaanesh is no different. Its appeal is grounded in such seemingly innocent ideals, every being's pursuit of happiness and the desire to improve to achieve it. Very little, if anything, holds more sway over the heart of any mortal, no matter the species, than desire in all its forms. It is universal. All beings want more than they have. They are never content. Where an imperial guardsman seeks glory, he finds Slaanesh. Where a rogue trader seeks wealth, he finds Slaanesh. Wherever there are desires, at the end of the quest to sate those desires lies Slaanesh, and utter damnation.